Dear reader, I'm Tony and this is Book Text. I have another Friday Reads video where I will talk about the books that I finished this week, what I'm currently reading, and what I hope to pick up next week or within the next week. But first, our word of the day is a delightful piece of American slang from the early 20th century. It is the word bumbershoot. Bumbershoot is a noun and it's slang for umbrella. But I'm definitely using bumbershoot this fall. If it ever precipitates again, I will pull out my bumbershoot instead of my umbrella because I think it's much funnier. All right, so I finished 4 books this week. I finished Lumberjanes Out of Time, Volume 4 of the Lumberjanes comic book collections. And this was an adventure. There was a blizzard, there was a mountainous monster, there was some Lumberjane history. If you have never heard of Lumberjanes, it's kind of like a Girl Scout group, except supernatural. And there's lots of fast friendship to the max. Friendship to the max is their motto. So it's just a delightful kind of lighthearted, there's still some serious elements to it, but mostly lighthearted read. Gorgeous artwork, kind of quirky artwork. Lots of bright colors. I just love these books and I really enjoyed this one. So I gave it 4 stars. I also finally finished Richard II by William Shakespeare. I was reading that for ShakeTube, and that's the story of the deposing of one king and the instatement of another king. So kind of classic Shakespearean drama, history. There's lots of betrayal. There's lots of intrigue. And kind of a whiny, I thought that Richard II himself was quite whiny, but that's just because I'm biased towards the Henrys who replaced him. So it was really good to read. I actually listened to a dramatic recording while I was reading, which was a superb experience because it allowed me to pick up on the subtleties of the writing, but also on the drama and the emotions that you don't necessarily get when you're just reading it flat. So I will definitely continue listening while I'm reading the other Shakespeare plays that I am reading for ShakeTube. I'm a little behind, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Then I started and finished, Here Lies the Librarian by Richard Peck. This is a middle grade historical fiction. I gave it 5 stars because I loved it. It's the story of, it's set in Indiana in 1914-ish, and it's the story of a girl who's more of a tomboy. She's kind of wants to be an auto mechanic just like her older brother, and their lives get turned upside down by the arrival of a quartet of library science students who are all women, all suffragists, and they arrive into this small town and they just infuse it with enthusiasm and hope for the future, progress, change, and it was just fun and easy to read. The story actually starts during a tornado which hits the small town cemetery and unearths several of the residents of the cemetery, and I just loved the kind of eerie event that was. I enjoyed those kinds of darkly funny stories. So I will totally recommend this to anyone, especially if you like historical fiction. And then I finally finished reading South Riding by Winifred Holtby, and I gave it 5 stars. I loved this book. It is set in a South Riding County in Yorkshire in the 1930s, and it kind of loosely focuses on 3 characters. There's Sarah Burton, who is a progressive headmistress who arrives in South Riding from elsewhere. She kind of is more of a city person, hence her progressiveness. Then there is Robert Carn, who lives in South Riding, has lived there his whole life. His family has lived there for centuries. And he is the traditional estate owner, except that his estate is failing horribly. And then there is Emma Beddoes, who is a 72-year-old county councilor. And she kind of interestingly represents a bridge between progression and tradition. It was so interesting. It definitely is a tale of how English tradition faded in the face of 20th century innovation. And so in that way, there's a lot of sad things that happen because you are losing the kind of small, quaint coziness of especially the Yorkshire countryside, but there's lots of hope for the future because there is progression being made and lives are being changed for the better in many ways. So I just adored this. I love Winifred Holtby with all my heart, and I will continue reading whatever this was the last thing she published right before she died in her 30s, so she didn't write a lot, but I will read everything else I can get my hands on. I loved the minute details of all the characters that we meet. This is an epic. It's a county epic, so it's kind of localized, but you get to meet a lot of characters. There's lots of details about them. And then you have the kind of political goings-on of the county council and descriptions of the Yorkshire countryside. You have the sweeping coverage of life in the South Riding. I need to hold it to my heart because I love it so much, and I will 100% read it again. Loved that book. Okay, that's what I finished reading. I am currently reading 7 books. So I have first my essay a day. I am reading from Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And this week I read 2 essays that really helped me to learn and change my mind about some things that just some maybe prejudices that I didn't know that I had. One was an essay about Cuba in the 1950s, and was not expecting to read about Cuba in a book that's mostly about Black feminism, but I just didn't realize how large of a Black population there is in Cuba. And this essay made me think that maybe one of the reasons we have painted Cuba as an other, especially in the 1950s, and of course it's kind of maintained since then, is because America didn't really appreciate the freedoms that the Black population had and enjoyed in Cuba in the 1950s. So that was really interesting for me to explore. The other essay that stood out to me was the titular essay, so In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, which was about Black women artists and how for a long time these women did not have access to a room of their own, like Virginia Woolf claims a woman artist needs to have in order to complete her art. So instead of having a room of their own and being able to write and paint and create poetry, Black women had to resort to gardens. And so this is kind of focused on the author's mother, who, without a room of her own, nurtured a beautiful garden as her artistic expression. It was really beautiful and interesting, and changed the way I think about Black women artists. I will keep their context in mind when I'm viewing or reading or enjoying art by Black women. So I'm enjoying that still. I'm also reading a short story a day, and I'm currently working through, almost done with, Among the Shadows by L.M. Montgomery. These are kind of darker tales, and it kind of is portrayed, especially with the cover art, as maybe like spooky, but only a few of the stories have been spooky. Otherwise, they're just kind of overall sad. They certainly many of them have happy endings, but there's just like this overwhelming sadness throughout the story. So I think that's why they're considered shadowy. But I read one this week that was about, what was it about? It was Okay. It was about an older woman who, living alone, gets robbed in the middle of the night, and she stumbles across the robber, and can't defend herself, so she throws a bottle of peppermint oil at him, and it breaks, and he escapes. But the next day, as she's walking around her small town, she smells peppermint, so you know that she's found her robber. It was really interesting. Had a lovely, happy ending. Very much kind of an L.M. Montgomery ending that I just really enjoyed. So I'm enjoying most of those stories. Then I'm reading a poem a day from Carrying Over by Carolyn and Kizer. These are poems from many different language traditions. And this week I read poems that were mostly translated from Macedonian. And there was a couple of lines that I thought I would share that were just really beautiful. And I cannot for my life pronounce these authors' names, so I apologize that I won't be sharing the names. But I like this stanza. The words refuse to swallow us any longer. Now we have set them to quarreling among themselves. Trying to strangle each other, they bite off their tongues. They have burned to tell us everything they know. It was a really good poem about language, about words and adjectives and nouns and verbs. And it just spoke to me as a language nerd. And then I also liked this line from a poem about nature. The tree, in its grief for the bird, begins to resemble the bird. I just like that thought, the image and the personification of a tree mourning for a bird that has left it. I was really intrigued by that. All right. Then I've been listening to the audiobook for The Martian Chronicles by Bradbury. And I'm almost done with it, so I'm hoping to pick up a new audiobook soon. This is kind of a loosely connected string of short stories about the conquering or the not so conquering of Mars by people from Earth. And it is delightfully trippy. It's just classic Ray Bradbury, lots of weird things happening. There's the world building is not solid, so there's I'm not sure if these are all taking place on the same Mars that the other stories have taken place on, because there's kind of different mythology, there's different science that's going on. It's really interesting. My favorite short story from this week was about a man who was obsessed with recreating the stories of Edgar Allan Poe on Mars. And it was there's definitely connections to Fahrenheit 451 in that story. So this is fun to read. I'm also still working my way through Cymbeline by William Shakespeare. It's a play about an ancient British king, and I'm reading and listening to it while I read. So I'm doing the same thing I did with Richard II. I don't have that much to say about it yet. And I also am working my way through Macbeth for ShakeTube. I'm a little bit behind, but I'm hoping to catch up soon. Then I picked up this week The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Now this is the story of a family, a very dysfunctional family, and the house that they live in, which has been furnished with Dutch furnishings, Dutch paintings, Delftware, china, plates and dishes and things. And it's definitely turning into kind of a haunted house story, except where most haunted house stories have a psychological element and a physical element to the haunting. This is purely psychological. There's something about this house that is tearing this family apart, and it is so interesting. I'm really enjoying the writing style. It's so easy to read. It's intriguing enough, but also literary enough to keep me going, but also make me think. I'm enjoying this so much. I'm hoping to finish it rather soon. So that's what I'm currently reading. I do have one book that I'm setting aside for now. I'm not totally DNFing it because I do plan to pick it up again, but that is The Landscape of History by John Lewis Gaddis. This is a nonfiction book about the study of history, and I'm just not in the right mindset for nonfiction right now because I'm in the throes of grading lots and lots of student papers for college students, and so I have to really focus, I have to really think, and they're all nonfiction. So I'm going to set this aside because I don't want to read any more nonfiction right now. and maybe pick it up during nonfiction November when I have my students are working on a longer paper, and so they're not turning in shorter assignments every week. So I'm hoping to pick that one up again later. Now, I'm finishing several of these books this week, so I'm picking up several more within the next week, including for the Stranger Things readathon, Maeve Binchy's Evening Class. This is a story about several different people who are all connected through the evening class that they're taking. That's really all I know about it. I'm counting it as my sweet contemporary book because it's more contemporary than many of the other books that I read, more contemporary than like a Victorian classic, per se. But also, I know that Maeve Binchy writes a lot of women's fiction, and women's fiction can often be kind of sweet when you think about the stories and the plots. So I'm hoping to pick this one up. It is a chunker, so I'm hoping I can finish it before Victober starts. Then I am going to be picking up, because I'm finishing the Ellen Montgomery short stories, and I still want to continue reading a short story a day. I'm going to pick up Katherine Mansfield's short story collection, The Garden Party and Other Stories. Katherine Mansfield did not live very long either. She died at 34 from, what was it called? Extrapulmonary tuberculosis. But she wrote in the early 20th century. And she is called an irreverent modernist writer, which I kind of love that idea. But she was kind of a progressive feminist, and so she's got lots of stories about women and their relationships and their experience kind of seeking rights and seeking freedom. So I'm looking forward to reading my first Katherine Mansfield short stories. Also, I just love that cover. Then I'm going to pick up a Victober warm-up. So I will be posting my Victober TBR soon because I am just super excited for it. But I want to do a warm-up because I have too many things I want to read during October, and I'm not going to get through all of them. So I'm going to start now with some Elizabeth Gaskell because I love her so much, and I'm trying to read everything she's written, not all at once, but eventually. I am going to be picking up her collection of novellas called Cousin Phillis and Other Stories. These stories, I don't know very much about them except that they are about Elizabeth Gaskell kind of characters. And I enjoyed that. I think some of these are actually influenced. I don't know if this is the collection that influenced the Cranford miniseries that BBC put off 10 or so years ago. So I know I might know some of the plot lines, but I'm really looking forward to enjoying more Elizabeth Gaskell. And then I'm going to pick up a new audiobook because I can't go without an audiobook on my morning walks. It's the only thing that keeps me going. So I am hoping to pick up Starlings by Jo Walton. This is actually a kind of collection of short speculative fiction. And that's all I know, but I'm looking forward to trying it out. So that's what I have been reading, what I'm hoping to read next. What are you reading right now? Please tell me in the comments. And remember, there's always another book.